The treasury of the Roman Empire, the money that fed the legions, built the roads, and paid for the grain that kept 1 million people in the city from rioting, was run, for the better part of 2 reigns, by a man who was legally somebody's property. He was born a slave. He would die one of the richest men most Romans had ever heard of, richer, the saying went, than the emperor himself. And that is exactly why he was killed. This is the story of Marcus Antonius Pallas, how a slave came to control the wealth of an empire, and why the fortune that made him untouchable became the reason he had to die. To understand Pallas, throw out the picture of a Roman slave as only a body in a mine or a field. Rome ran on slaves at every level, and at the very top of that world sat a small, strange class, educated Greeks and Easterners who kept the accounts, managed the estates, and ran the households of the powerful. A wealthy Roman did not do his own sums. His literate slaves did, and the most capable of them held real responsibility, sometimes over enormous fortunes. Now add the twist that made a man like Pallas possible. The emperors of the first century did not trust the Senate, the old aristocracy that still dreamed of the Republic, and now and then of a dead emperor. So the emperors looked for servants whose loyalty ran to them and no one else, men with no rival power base, no ancient family, no seat in the Senate to hide behind. They found them among their own freedmen, former slaves of the imperial household. A freedman owed everything to the man who had freed him. To the old senatorial families, this was the natural order turned upside down. Men whose grandfathers had worn a slave's chains now decided which senator was granted a province, and whose petition ever reached the emperor's ear. That humiliation did not fade. It curdled into a resentment the freedmen would never outrun, and one day it would come looking for the richest of them. For a brilliant, ambitious slave, this was the one ladder in all of Rome that reached the very top. Pallas belonged to Antonia Minor, daughter of Mark Antony, mother of Claudius, one of the most respected women in Rome. At some point she freed him, and like every freedman, he took his former owner's family name. He became Marcus Antonius Pallas. For years he was simply a trusted, capable member of a great house. And then, in the year 41, history did something no one had planned. The Emperor Caligula was murdered, and in the chaos the Praetorian Guard dragged out Caligula's uncle Claudius, the man the imperial family had spent decades treating as an embarrassment, and made him emperor almost by accident. When Claudius rose, the household rose with him. Pallas was appointed a rationibus, in plain terms, the secretary in charge of the imperial finances. The imperial estates, the provincial taxes, the tribute of conquered nations, it all flowed across his desk. And he was not alone. Claudius ran his government through a triad of freedmen, Pallas over the money, Narcissus over the correspondence, Callistus over petitions and law. 3 men who had been born slaves now sat at the controls of the largest empire on earth, and senators, men of the oldest blood in Rome, had to come to them, hats in hand, to get anything done. The resentment this caused is hard to overstate. You can still feel it burning off the pages of the ancient writers. But the real question, the one Romans argued about then, and historians still argue about now, is this: how does a salaried freedman end up with a fortune that rivals the state he serves? The number that comes down to us is staggering. The historian Tacitus put Pallas's wealth at 300 million sesterces. For a sense of scale, a Roman legionary earned perhaps 900 sesterces in a year, and a man needed 400,000 simply to qualify for the knightly class. Pallas's fortune, as reported, was on the order of a small nation's budget. Pliny the Elder lists him among the richest men of the age. So how? Here the honest answer is that we do not fully know, and the sources we do of are not neutral. Tacitus, our main witness, despised Pallas and everything he stood for, and we have to read him knowing that. Ancient writers claimed Pallas never stole directly from the imperial accounts, but that is a claim made inside a hostile tradition, not a fact anyone can audit 2,000 years later. What we can say is more interesting than simple theft. A man in Pallas's seat had three things almost no one else in the empire had at once: real financial skill, information — he knew where every stream of imperial money ran before anyone else did — and the direct favor of an emperor who rewarded his servants lavishly. Think about what that information alone was worth. When a province's harvest tax was about to fall due, when a loan to a desperate senator could be called in or extended, Pallas saw it first, and from the inside. In a world with no newspapers and no published accounts, simply knowing what was about to happen was itself a form of wealth. A man who keeps the empire's books does not need to steal from them to grow rich. He only needs to know, before anyone else, where the money will move next, and to be standing where he can move with it. And there is one moment that captures the whole game. The Senate, desperate to flatter the man who controlled the money, voted Pallas 15 million sesterces and the honorary insignia of a praetor. Pallas declined the cash and kept the honor. He let it be known that he preferred to remain in his modest poverty, and the Senate solemnly praised him for his old-fashioned thrift. It was theater, and everyone in the room knew it. He had reached the point where refusing money in public only made him look more powerful. For a while, being that rich made him untouchable. Then it made him a target. Pallas made one last great play for power, and it was the move that would destroy him. When Claudius's wife Messalina fell from favor and was executed, Pallas backed a new candidate to be Empress Agrippina, Claudius's own niece, and he helped clear the path for her son to be adopted as Claudius's heir. That son was Nero. It worked. Agrippina became empress. Nero was set on the road to the throne. But a kingmaker is only safe while the king still needs him. Claudius died in the year 54, poisoned, the ancient writers say, by Agrippina herself. Nero became emperor at 16, and within a year he dismissed Pallas from office, stripping the freedman of the very machinery that had made him matter. For a few years Pallas lived on, immensely rich, quietly dangerous, in a world that no longer had a use for him. And to a young emperor who was draining the treasury on spectacle and building, an old freedman sitting atop 300 million sesterces was not a relic. He was a solution. Around the year 62, the ancient tradition tells us, Nero had Pallas killed and seized the fortune. The wealth that had once made him too valuable to touch was now the only reason anyone remembered he was alive. He did not fall because he failed. He fell because he had won too well. So what do we take from a man like Pallas, a slave who ran an empire's treasury and died for the fortune he built? Start with how he rose. Pallas never owned the Roman treasury. He owned none of the estates, none of the tribute, none of the gold that ran through his hands. What he had was position, proximity to where the wealth of the world actually moved, plus the skill to manage it and the trust to be left in charge of it. In any age, that combination compounds faster than almost anything a person can own outright. Position beats ownership. Get close to where value flows, become the one who can be trusted with it, and you rarely need to own the river to grow rich from it. But Pallas is also a warning, and this is the harder lesson. His wealth grew far past his power to protect it. As the servant of Claudius, his fortune was shielded by the most powerful man alive. Without that shield, 300 million sesterces stopped being security and became bait. Wealth without the power to defend it is not really wealth. It is a loan the world can call in the moment it decides to. Pallas learned that at the edge of a blade. He was, by any measure, a rare exception. Most of the enslaved millions of Rome got no such story, and it is worth saying that plainly. But the two lessons he leaves outlast the empire that killed him. Get close to where the wealth moves. And never let your fortune outgrow your power to keep it. If these are the kind of stories you want more of history you can actually use, you'll find where to go from here just below.